This is the My Campaign Coach podcast, where we talk about how to win elections. Every week, we let you hear straight from the best consultants, operatives, and candidates in the game, all for one reason, to help you win. For more information about how we can help you win, visit mycampaigncoach.com. Now, here's your host, Raj Schaefer.
Welcome to the How to Run for Office podcast from My Campaign Coach. Our guest this week is an aficionado of Austrian economics, classically liberal in political taste, and spent years in the WWE wrestling in the ring with the likes of Steve Austin, John Cena, and Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. And now he's running for mayor of Knox County, Tennessee. This was a really fun interview to do, and I think you guys are going to love it. Before we get to the interview, I want to say thank you to y'all that have reached out in the last couple weeks with feedback on the podcast. I love hearing from y'all, and it's been incredibly encouraging to hear about the ways the show is having an impact. I want to give a special shout out, though, to Tyler from Arkansas, who just recently won his election to be Justice of the Peace in his home county. Tyler has been listening to the podcast since about the time we put on episode 8. And the other day he messaged me saying, "Raz, I've listened to your podcast for a while now. It convinced me that I could run for office, so I did. Because of the tips you provided in the podcast, I was able to beat a 16-year incumbent." Now, I just had to know more about what happened to Tyler, and so I got on the phone, and we had a great time talking today about the campaign. I'm just really proud of what Tyler did and winning a near race with only 14 vote differential between him and his opponent. He brought home the W and is going to do a great job as Justice of the Peace out there in northern Arkansas. Okay, let's introduce our guest. Glenn Jacobs is a Republican candidate for mayor of Knox County, Tennessee. A career with the WWE spanning nearly 25 years has afforded Jacobs the opportunity to perform in front of millions of fans across the United States and over 40 countries around the world. But he has chosen East Tender, Tennessee as his home for over 20 years. Jacobs is owner of the Jacobs Insurance Associates and the local champion of the Kindness Revolution, a national anti-bullying initiative. Along with his wife, Crystal, he founded Cane's Crusaders, a nonprofit organization with the mission of bringing joy to chronically ill teenagers in eastern Tennessee. I first noticed Glenn when he did an interview talking with Matt Kibbe on CRTV about socialism and why the free market economics idea provided such a powerful suite of tools to elevate people from poverty. I was just wondering how a huge wrestler learned what Austrian economics was. After watching a few dozen more videos of him talking about politics and economics on YouTube, I was confident he'd make an awesome guest, but honestly, the idea to reach out never crossed my mind. It's a brain fart as a podcast you don't like to admit. But I got saved because a couple weeks later, I was speaking at a graduation, and one of the dads of a girl that was graduating that day was actually friends with Jacobs, and it came up in conversation, and he agreed to hook us up. So we had got to talk, and I had a great time interviewing him. Let's get to the interview. Mr. Jacobs, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for coming on today.
Well, thank you so much, and please don't call me Mr. Jacobs. That's my dad.
All right, Glenn. Well, thank you so much. I'm excited to get to talk to you today. You got quite the resume. You're looking to be the next mayor of Knoxville, Tennessee, and you've been a WWE wrestler. You were the Undertaker's half brother there as Kane, and spent several years there. And I'd love to find out a little bit about your background, where you came from, how you got into wrestling, and then how a guy that's a WWE wrestler got interested in Austrian economics and ended up running for office.
Sure. That'll take a little time.
Hey, we got it.
Awesome. I always wanted to be a professional athlete ever since I was a little kid. And it looked like I was going to be able to play football in the NFL. I played basketball as well in high school and college. Ended up playing football, was very good at football just naturally because of my size and athletic ability. I played basketball for so many years that I was actually a late comer to football. I didn't play in high school. I ended up playing in college. And blew my knee out. I went to the Chicago Bears camp. I was there literally overnight. And one of the great disappointments of my life, I went through one day of physicals. And what happens generally is I was an undrafted free agent, and you'll go to training camp, and the first day is all physicals. And they look at everything from your eyes and your hearing and your teeth. Of course, then orthopedic surgeons will examine every joint and make sure that that your body is working correctly, and my knee was not. So on my second day, I woke up and I was very excited because I was going to get to go practice for the Chicago Bears. And as everybody else was getting off the bus and headed to the practice facility, I got off the bus and was taken up to the director of player personnel office and given a plane ticket home.
Oh, man.
So, as I said, it was very crushing for me. And I had to reevaluate my life and what I wanted to do. And I'd always been a fan of professional wrestling. I thought that it had been, good entertainment ever since I was a kid, and thought that I had what it would take to get into that business. So I pursued that, and it was, a long, hard road. Took me a few years before I was able to make a living at it at all. And then a few more years, I was able to sign a contract with WWE, which is the premier professional wrestling organization in the world. And a few years after that, I finally was able to find a great deal of success. And, I've had just a tremendous career. I mean, I've performed in front of millions of people live and on TV. I've been in the ring or on TV with some of the greatest entertainers in the entire world, with people like Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson and other wrestlers, but also folks outside of wrestling. I've done a lot with Pete Rose, who's Major League Baseball Hall of Fame. Yeah. I've worked with Drew Carey a couple times. I've worked with the Muppets, and
That's awesome.
Been in 2 movies. Yeah, so it really has been a great career. And I've also traveled all around the world. I think I've been probably in about 50 countries at this point. And I realize what we have here in America is so special because you don't get that everywhere. And what that is the freedom to utilize your God-given gifts and abilities to create the life that you want. That's what the American dream is all about. I found a great deal of success in what really is a niche industry. I have that gift, right? And it's something, a skill set that's unique, but I'm not special in that. I think that everybody has some sort of gift that allows them to make the world a better place, allows them to contribute in a way, and that is going to allow them to be successful. In a free market system, the only way that you can be successful is by helping other people get what they want. One of my favorite quotes is from Zig Ziglar, the great sales guru, who said that you can have anything you want if you help enough other people get what they want. And that's what the free market is really all about.
Yeah.
And I'm just firmly convinced of that here in America, almost all of us are going to have the opportunity to go out and create the life of our dreams. And it's not easy. It takes a lot of work, but it's possible. It won't happen for everybody, but it can. And that's something that's very special. And that's really the reason I got into politics, because I want to make sure that that remains so, and that my kids, my grandkids, your grandkids have that ability to live the American dream.
Well, I think that's really one of the things that you bring across clearly as you've been on the campaign trail. I've got to see some of your videos, and you're talking about exactly those things. And my hope is that you're going to see some great success there and get a very positive audience there in Knoxville. From there, not many people have, first of all, heard of Austrian economics and understand what it is. I got my introduction when I was a kid. And
Really?
Yeah, actually, I was probably not the only I was homeschooled, and I had a love for politics and Austrian economics early on. I was, as a 13-year-old nerd, I somehow knew that I wanted to study natural rights-based political science and Austrian economics. And that set me on a path to attending Hillsdale College, which is one of the few places where you can study both of those. And so it's, learning about Hayek and von Mises, and these guys those were early buddies of mine as I was in high school, and my fun reading was quite nerdy, as you might imagine. But it's they've been consistent guys that I've looked to, and obviously have had a big impact on the last century as as Keynes' main foils, and have been some guys that you've learned a lot about. What was it that kind of turned you on to that? Was it the world travel and what you were seeing there? What really kind of turned you to studying that discipline and into politics?
Sure. I actually came to find Austrian economics from my political studies. Um, I think like a lot of people, I was trying to sort of figure things out for myself, and I didn't feel that I could be pigeonholed into a particular political characterization.
Mm-hmm.
And I came to the conclusion that the same conclusion that Lord Acton did. Lord Acton is famous for saying, that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. But he had another saying, which I think is actually more important. And he said that liberty is not the means to a political end. Liberty itself is the highest political end. And what that means is the government's job is to protect our natural rights. And these are what was enunciated so well by Thomas Jefferson in the Declaration of Independence, that Lockean theory of we all possess the rights to life, liberty, and Jefferson called it pursuit of happiness, Locke called it property, but it's the same concept that all of us, no one on this plane has a higher dominion over our lives than we do.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, if you're a Christian, or you're a person of other faith, you will believe that God has a higher ownership of your life, but no other human being has higher ownership than you do. You own yourself, and it doesn't matter, if we're talking about one person or millions of people. We all own ourselves as individuals, and the government's job is to protect our life, our liberty, and our property, so that we can live in a state of so the society works. And when I'm talking about liberty, I should probably back up and say what I mean by that. Freedom and liberty are two different things. Freedom is basically says there are no constraints on your ability to act, all right? Which is fine if you're out in the wilderness. The only constraint is nature itself. But when we're in society, there are constraints. We can't do whatever we want because other people also have freedom to do what they want. And so in society, that's when we get to the concept of liberty, which means that you are free to act as long as your actions do not impede upon other people's liberty, life, liberty, and property as well, if that makes any sense.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was my line of thinking. And I didn't study economics in college because I'm not a math guy. My sister's the math person. I'm not a math person. And I was very intimidated by, all these formulas and all this stuff. But as I'm reading like people like Hayek and other folks, and I'm reading their political writings, they're talking about Austrian economics. And I'm like, what is this thing, Austrian economics? I don't want to study economics. But finally, I'm like, yeah, I've got to, because all these people that I'm having a profound influence on me politically, they keep talking about Austrian economics. And so I did, and I learned that economics is actually not about numbers.
No.
It's about people. It's about
mm-hmm.
people. It's about human action. Again, that had an even more profound influence on me, because I'm like, oh my goodness, this all makes sense. Really what we're talking about when we're talking about economics is our ability to utilize our time, our freedom to do the things that we want to do, whether it is engaging in things that will bring us a monetary profit, or engaging in things that bring us a psychological or psychic profit. And again, that just reinforced sort of my whole worldview. And it was very encouraging to me, and I also realized that how wrong the mainstream has it at this point.
Right.
Because if you think about it, if we're talking about people, and the study of economics is really the study of human action, all these formulas and stuff, they don't work, because people don't always act in rational ways, and we can't always predict what people are going to do, which brings us to why do we have, supposedly we live in this, we live in a society now in America, which is a mixed economy. We have a great deal of free market, but we also have a great deal of control, especially at the higher echelons, with our things like our monetary system, and some of the policies of all the federal and the state and the local governments and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But all this stuff is supposed to work really well, and all of that is there basically to make sure that the economy functions correctly. But then we have these tremendous busts along the way, like we had with the housing bust in 2008. And Austrian economics actually explains why that happens. And it has a lot to do with the fact that you cannot predict human behavior. You can't say that people are going to do a certain thing. And when you start interfering with the economy more than what the government's role should be, and I believe that the government's role in the economy should essentially be to use its police power to make sure that people enforce property rights and as well as enforce contract law. But that's really about it. But when the government starts getting in and starts trying to plan outcomes, that's when we run into problems.
Right.
And the economy in a free market, the economy is actually self-regulating. And what will happen is, yes, you're going to have recessions, you're going to have that sort of thing, but they're never going to be as bad as they are currently because people are free then, to go in and alter their behaviors and do that sort of thing to help mitigate that. And then also what happens is the incentives of our current system are such that when people react to those, if the government says we're going to give you a lot of money to go out and buy houses, that's what happens. And you drive up the price of houses because everybody starts getting into that. Mm-hmm. Okay. You don't have those incentives in a free market. I mean, you just wouldn't. I mean, that whole thing, the whole housing bubble, everybody, even the Keynesians now, will admit that was caused by the Federal Reserve and also lending policies. And you just wouldn't have that in a free market. Again, it's not a utopian vision. It's just this idea that the market comes in and will self-regulate. What happens with central planning is there is no ability to self-regulate, and the Keynesian paradigm is based on the idea that we can capture the animal spirits of the free market, but at the same time mitigate the destructive consequences of that. In truth, they have it completely backwards because the consequences will mitigate themselves, and if that makes any sense to anyone. But Frederick Bastiat, who's one of my favorite writers, he wrote an essay which is called "That Which Is Seen and That Which Is Not Seen." And basically, what he said is the difference between a good economist and a bad economist is a bad economist looks at a policy, sees the short-term intended constructive benefits of that policy. A good economist sees the long-term unintended and destructive consequences of the policy. And what we have now is, all we do is we look at the short term and we look at all of this great stuff that's going to happen when the government does that. But eventually there's always a price to be paid. Right. And unfortunately, when I look, I'm sure you're along the same lines. When I look off into the distance in the future, I worry that price is coming at some point, and we are going to have to pay it. And that's going to be very painful.
Well, and that happens not just in economics, that idea of unintended consequences. We see that bleed over. Sometimes it affects both realms, the public political as well as the economic side. But that attention that you pay and that understanding of unintended consequences, I believe, will serve you uniquely well as you're getting into the political realm with hopefully being elected mayor, because it's hard to find a single piece of legislation or many of the different things that a city council passes or even a school board that isn't just chock full of unintended consequences that folks refuse to recognize. And I think that idea is one that, whether you're studying politics or economics or just a dad or anybody, that is something that you need to have a clear understanding of, because a lot of things that may in the short term seem really good. I think that Bastiat's definition of a good or bad economist, we can apply that in a whole lot of areas. I'd be hard pressed to find a part of life that doesn't apply. He's a genius, and any of our listeners should go check out Von Mises, Hayek, Bastiat. These are rock stars.
Yeah, they sure are.
So what was it that catalyzed you to run for mayor?
Well, it was really just all these things. I can't say that there was any one thing that caused the flip to switch. I'm sorry, that caused a switch to flip in my head. It was just the idea, that I want to do my part to see if I can try to make the world, a better place, at least my part of it. And yeah, my view is a little different. I don't think that that I'm going to use the government to do all these wonderful, grand things. I want to keep the government out of the way so that the people in civil society can do a lot of wonderful and great things.
So what was it about the political situation there in Knoxville? So I get the feeling that it was an open seat. You had somebody that retired or didn't run again? Sure.
Yeah, the current county mayor, who's really good, and I think he would probably fit in very well with this conversation, actually. He's running for Congress. We have term limits in Knox County. People can run for 2 terms, and that's it. So he's term limited and running for Congress, and I saw an open seat. And I also think just currently with the political environment the way that it is, people are tired of politics as usual, and they're tired of politicians. And I often say that when we look at President Trump, I don't think he's an anomaly. I think that going forward, there's going to be a lot more people like him at all levels of government, in that there's going to be folks who are not part of the political system, folks who are not your conventional, quote-unquote, politician. And I think that's a good thing, really, because I think that what we have been seeing in America is a permanent political overclass. Politicians that get in and they never leave. And if for no other reason, it's good because at least you'll have people that have fresh ideas, and hopefully some of those ideas will work. But again, you look at our founding fathers, and they never envisioned a permanent political overclass. They saw citizen legislators, people that would go for a few years and represent their constituents and go back home. George Washington is an excellent example of this, of course, and set the precedent as president. And we've lost that long ago, but I think that is starting to come back now as people are just so disillusioned by a lot of things that are going on, not only in Washington, D.C., but also in their local town hall.
Yeah, we talk a lot about the swamp in D.C., and it is very real. But what a lot of people don't see is the problems in their own backyard. I think that as I've been involved with and observed a lot of municipal elections just here in Texas, the closer you get to home, a lot of times, one, the politics gets dirtier, and two, people are less likely to actually look at someone's record of what they've done. They look at the personality and it's like, oh, well, I know so-and-so. I've enjoyed hanging out with them. They're a nice person. They go to my church. They can't be all that bad. I'm going to support them just because I know them. They don't look at their record. They don't actually consider it from that side. And so when them bad things happen, of course, it couldn't be the fault of this person that I know and that I like. The fact is that you can have wonderfully nice people that you'd love to have over to have a beer at your house or go out to a barbecue with that can make terrible decisions when it comes to governing. You don't have to be a bad person to make bad decisions when it comes to politics. And when it comes to local side, I think that gets lost in a lot of cases on people. And that's part of what makes these local offices so important is, in the type of governing system that we're supposed to have, the vast majority of decisions are left to the state and local governments. That's the idea of federalism. Right. But yet that's oftentimes the sphere of government people pay the least attention to.
Right. You're exactly right. And I would consider myself, a constructionist of the Constitution, an originalist. I believe the Constitution, you can read it and it means what it says. It's funny nowadays that I was talking with a lawyer friend of mine, and he said this ironically, but he told me that I wasn't qualified to read the Constitution because I'm not a judge and I'm not a lawyer. I've never been to law school. But he said it ironically.
Right.
He didn't.
That's good.
But that is unfortunately the attitude of many folks, especially many sort of elitists. Right. That the average person out there, shouldn't be looking at our founding documents and make any sense of those, which is complete absurdity. Back when the Constitution was ratified, there were debates in taverns about the Constitution. The average person was certainly encouraged to think about, different interpretations of things. If you look at the Constitution, the powers of the federal government are strictly limited. I mean, we can have the debate all day long about, the necessary and proper clause and the interstate commerce clause and all these things. But in the end, why would the powers of Congress be enumerated if that wasn't the only powers that they possess? Okay. I mean, if the founders were going to say, okay, Congress can do anything and justify it, by these sort of catch-all phrases within the Constitution, there was no point in having really any of it, right? The most important portion of the Bill of Rights of the Constitution is the 10th Amendment. I once heard that Samuel Adams wanted to make the 10th Amendment the First Amendment because he thought it was so important. Mm-hmm. And, you get to that idea of laboratories of democracy, where the various states, since they had most of the policy-making power, what worked is where people would move to, and those states would become politically more powerful. And that was the whole idea. So your state and local governments, they should have, I think when we look at Washington, and sometimes I wonder, if the mess that is Washington, if the states would just reassert their authority under the 10th Amendment, I think that would be a bulwark against all that. So your state and local governments can be pretty powerful. It's just a matter of if they exercise that under the Constitution. But even for all practical purposes, there are differences in the country. I mean, I live in Tennessee, you live in Texas. Our states are doing really, really well because they're business friendly, because they have low tax rates. We have some natural advantages as well, but people are moving here. Businesses are moving here. I mean, in Nashville, one of a huge financial firm is leaving New York to come to Nashville because of the tax rate.
Yeah.
So it does work, and when we look at state and local politics, those are vitally important, but they're not on CNN all the time. It's not on Fox News. Because like state and local stuff isn't sexy like the federal government is, people discount the importance of state and local governments. But I can tell you in Tennessee, we are doing really well. And I'm not going to say this very often. I don't generally compliment politicians. But the reason is because our General Assembly and our governor have done a tremendous job in ensuring that Tennessee's taxes stay low and that we are very business friendly, and it is paying huge dividends.
I love it. So now one of the great things, it can be great or awful things about campaigns and run for office is that you can be the ideal person for me to snap my fingers and put you in office, but there's this thing called a campaign that you gotta win first to actually be able to do all the awesome things that you would do should you be there. And so, early this year, you kind of make the decision, okay, we're in. Now you're having to learn how to build a campaign. You're having to assemble a team. You're up against multiple other challengers. You got the election in August, I believe. How do you make that transition, and how did all this kind of come together to actually build the campaign?
It was actually last year that we made the decision, made the announcement. Yeah, it was April of last year. The Republican primary was May 2nd. It was May 1st of this year. And I was lucky. I had just a great team. I was very fortunate in being able to put together people that knew what they were doing and folks that were very passionate about helping me. And that was the main reason that I was able to really squeak out a victory, was because of the people that surrounded me. And I have my hats off to them. They just did a tremendous job. But yeah, we had to come up with a strategy, and it's a lot like running a business. It's like, okay, this is what we want to do. How are we going to achieve that? And of course, I'm not your conventional candidate. So we had to sort of, figure some things out. And then it's, Mike Tyson once said that everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face.
Yep.
That's pretty much the same. You get out there, and you're on the campaign trail, and then like this doesn't work, and and you think it is. So you have to discard that. And then you have a tremendous opportunity. Like, why didn't we do this sooner? Well, I didn't know this was going to happen, right? And there was a lot of that as well. So you have to have a plan and sort of look at things and say, this is how we'd like to go. But you also have to be flexible enough to realize that that's going to change in the real world when you actually get out there. And we did a lot of unconventional things. I was very fortunate to have the support of some of the WWE superstars who came down and did events and created a lot of buzz. My social media, because of my public profile, my social media was, just tremendous for a local candidate. I mean, and I don't say this bragging; it's just looking at it. But for a local candidate, I mean, there's no way I should have had the social media impact that I did. I mean, I have more followers than some national candidates do.
Yeah.
Which really helped me out. When we were looking at how we take our message out there, our main thing was just grassroots, and we knocked on about 50,000 doors over the course of the year.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it was a lot. And again, it wasn't all me. We had a team of people that were doing that. We did direct mail. We had a pretty robust direct mail program. And with our social media, we didn't do any TV at all because I didn't feel that we had enough money to reach the saturation and the frequency of television that we would have needed to be effective. Mm-hmm. Our radio was targeted as well. We did smaller stations, and we had ads on Christian radio station and an urban station. And the reason for that is because, again, we could just get a lot more exposure and frequency, even though those stations weren't as big as, say, the big news station or the big sports station or the big music stations. We could get a lot more bang for our buck with their particular audiences. And we also target a lot of it at the quote-unquote unconventional voter, mm-hmm. because I knew that if we were going to get out there and try to, just get in a local election, fewer people vote. They tend to be older, folks, and tend to be, I don't want to say establishment folks, but people that are more plugged in, because again, you're not getting on CNN all the time. You're not getting on Fox all the time like you would in the presidential race.
Right.
So the people that vote in local elections, are much more plugged in. We knew that we were going to have to expand that voter base because we didn't, I'm not a political commodity here locally, at that time. So I knew that I'd have to get other people involved, which we were able to do. We got a lot of first-time voters, people who don't normally vote in an election like this. And, we're just fortunate that all those things came together and we were able to win.
So it was a multi-way primary, right? So I'm not terribly familiar with the way Tennessee elections work, but it seems like you have the Republican primary for the county mayor, and you had several people running against you, and now you're in the general election, which is in August. Yeah. Is that correct?
Yes.
So you won. Did you have a runoff or anything, or did you win the initial primary outright?
Yeah, I won the initial primary outright, but so I had two opponents. Out of the 40,570 something votes that were cast, I won by 23 votes. It was literally razor thin.
Oh my gosh.
Razor thin margin. Yeah, and so now I go on to face the Democratic challenger in the general election, which is August 2nd. And then in Tennessee, we're unique as well because we have a period of early voting, which is a 2-week period that starts about 3 weeks before the election, and then you have a week off, and then election day. So for the general election, early voting is July 13th through July 28th, and then election day is August 2nd.
It's pretty similar to what we have here in Texas. What are you doing now, gearing up? So you got the Republican primary behind you. You have the Democrat general election contest coming up. You got about a month and a half until early voting starts.
Yeah.
So you're in the crunch time, getting ready for get out the vote. Kind of, how are you looking at the next month and a half leading up to Election Day?
It really will follow the same thing that we did before. Lots of ground game, knocking on doors, meet and greets, getting out and meeting people. And then as far as, we'll look at whatever other, means that we think will be effective, to get our message out. I'm just a huge believer in knocking on doors.
Yeah.
And I think that is what wins local elections. So we're going to continue to do that, and that'll be our main emphasis.
Well, our listeners know that's knocking on doors is about my favorite thing in the world. There's not an episode that goes by that I don't talk about the wisdom of that and how powerful it is. So I'm glad to hear that's something you're doing a lot of, because there's out of all the research and different types of political contact, that's just the gold standard. And a lot of campaigns, especially the ones that feel like they have enough money to not do that, your dollars per vote is so much better. And especially on the local level, one of the great things that you see there is you build those relationships, and running for re-election becomes so much easier, because now people, they just haven't seen your face on a piece of mail. They've met you. They've met somebody that was supporting you, and they feel like they know who you are. We had a city council candidate here in Fort Worth that I was helping a couple years ago, and he personally knocked on several thousand doors and did the first pass. And I was actually running a block walking team at the time that was working for him. And I was handling for the supporters, the folks that indicated support, I was handling the basically get out the vote, giving them the early voting locations and times and stuff, and revisiting them. And every single person I talked to who had met the candidate, their response when I came up and gave it to him was, "Oh yeah, awesome. I know this guy. I know Brian."
Yep.
And they might have only spent 15 to 30 seconds with him, but they felt like they knew his character, they knew who he was and what he wanted to do. And that's not what you get with radio, with TV, with social media. It's a unique thing to human contact, and it's always exciting, because I think that's going to help. That keeps you grounded in a very unique way.
Well, absolutely, and I have a friend who is an old-time political and worked for like everybody in Tennessee, and part of the Republican Party for years. And she made a great point to me early on that it changes the candidate as well, because you get out there and you actually meet people and you see what's on people's minds.
Yes.
And for me, it's just personally rewarding. It's just so much fun.
Yeah.
The first day that I was knocking on doors, last door of the day was a 92-year-old lady. She lived in Tennessee for 11 years, had moved here from California. And in the course of ended up being a 20-minute conversation we had, I discovered that she had worked for Ronald Reagan when he was running for governor of California.
Oh,
so
wow.
She personally knew Ronald Reagan. She had worked for Richard Nixon when he was running for governor of California, so she personally knew Richard Nixon. And it's one of those things, man. I wouldn't have traded that for the world.
No,
because I got to talk with this lady for 20 minutes who just shared all these wonderful things with me. And then, of course, you really do just get a better understanding of what's on people's minds and what they're concerned about, and what they really think the state of things is. So I think it's important not only campaigning as getting out there with a campaign. It's also important when you become an elected official, because you're much more knowledgeable about what's actually going on in the community and how people feel, what they think the important issues are.
So looking forward to that, let's say, as I hope that you win the election August 2nd, and now you're getting ready to take office, you're going to be the mayor of the county. As you're approaching building your team and taking on a new leadership role there in Knox County, what are some of the top priorities that you're looking at, and kind of your mental position as you're thinking about taking on that new and very large leadership role?
Well, I think the three things that I believe are most important is, number one, ensuring that we have good jobs in our area. I think we are uniquely positioned in Knox County in that we have two of the world's best research and development institutions, and that is the Oak Ridge National Laboratory and the University of Tennessee. I think we're the only place in the country that has both a major research university and a federal government laboratory in close proximity to one another. And some of the things that are happening that the private sector is taking advantage of in our area is truly astounding, especially in the advanced manufacturing and advanced material sectors of the economy. And I really think that we can leverage that to become a global player in those sectors of the economy, and that's going to be great for Knox County. But when people have good jobs, a lot of the other issues sort of dissipate,
right?
Because they just do. And I think as a community we can handle some of the other issues when people have good jobs as well. I think we handle those better. So I believe that the mayor's number one priority is ensuring good jobs to the extent that they can. Of course, going along with that, I want to keep taxes low. I think that's vitally important for everybody. The way that we're going to attract good jobs and make sure that people can fill those jobs is by having a world-class workforce, which means that we have to have a world-class education system. And I believe that goes beyond academics. Just nationally, we need to concentrate a lot more on career and technical education.
Mm-hmm.
When I look at my own life, this is something that's been reinforced to me in my own life. I have one brother and one sister. My sister's a rocket scientist. She worked at NASA. She lived out.
Wow.
She worked at Johnson Space Center in Houston. Now she has a PhD in history, and she's just brilliant. My brother didn't read very well when he was young. He had some learning disabilities. He didn't do very well in school, but when he was 9 years old, he's sitting at the kitchen table, and my mom is yelling at him because he's got his watch taken apart. To put it, what are you doing? So he just puts it back together, and it works just fine. And that's what he can do. I mean, he is an extremely gifted mechanic. He can take apart and fix anything from a watch to a piece of heavy equipment. My sister, who's a rocket scientist, I don't know that she can put gas in her car. Okay.
Yeah.
Both of them have their own gift. And my brother's gift was not in academics. It was working with his hands, but he's very good at it. And I think we've done our children a huge disservice by telling all of them, especially the ones that are good working with their hands, that the only way that you're going to be successful is going to college. College is just not for everybody. For the people that it is, that's pathway to success. But the trades are also a pathway.
I couldn't agree more as far as the trades being an important area and us robbing our kids in a lot of cases by pushing them exclusively and defining success as college. And so I'm excited for what you guys are doing to professionalize that and really open people's eyes to the opportunity there. As you're looking at your office, I know you've learned a lot about what it takes to run and that your motivations looking back on your background and what's brought you to politics. That's a lot of what our listeners, why they're involved. Do you have any final thoughts as we're kind of wrapping up here about as far as advice for candidates or why people should be running for office?
Yeah, I think, we should be running for office again because you're trying to make the world a better place. And especially as a conservative, I look at some of the things that happen in our country and around the world, and it really bothers me because we're getting away from what makes America great, and that is the opportunity to pursue the American dream. So for me personally, that's why I ran, and I would encourage anyone who does decide to run, you have to remain true to yourself, and if you don't, you're just another politician. Sorry, And
yeah.
I think there's a difference between a politician and a statesman, and someone who's trying to do it for the right reason. And you're not just trying to get elected. You want to get in there, and you want to be able to have a positive impact. So you have to remain true to yourself. And as far as how you run a campaign, I'm certainly no expert. But again, just from my experience, the ground game is crucial, and getting out there and just working hard, knocking on doors, that gives you a real chance no matter who you are. And that's what I would encourage people to do first and foremost. All the other stuff is really It's great and it's wonderful. But in the end, as you said earlier, making that personal connection with people, that's what I believe gets folks elected, especially in the local race.
I could not agree more. Where can folks find you online if they want to reach out or support your campaign or just say hey?
Sure. Its website is jacobsformayor.com. And on Facebook, it's Facebook.com/JacobsForMayor. On Twitter, it's Glenn with 2 N's, so it's GLENN, Jacobs TN.
Perfect. Well, we'll be linking to that and some of the interviews. There were several great videos, including your interview with Matt Kibbe and others that I found online as I was, that's actually how I first found out you were running for mayor. And so I will be linked to those in the show notes. And Glenn, thank you so much for coming on. Best of luck come August 2nd. I'm excited to see what happens there. And just a shout out and thanks to Jason, our mutual friend, for hooking us up. That was pretty cool. And it's been great talking to you today.
Actually, if I could take 2 seconds, you were talking about Hillsdale College. My friend that set this up, Jason Vranes, works at Crown College of the Bible here in Knox County, Tennessee. And it's just a tremendous asset for our community. Crown College is a private school, much like Hillsdale, takes no government money. And 97% of the students will graduate from Crown College debt-free.
That's awesome.
Amazing. And, of course, they have a tremendous emphasis on vocational and career training. So these kids come out of college with an associate's degree or whatever, certificate in whatever area, no debt, and the ability to go out and get a good job. And when I look at that, I really think that's the model for higher education in this country.
Yeah, I was blessed to come out of college with no debt as a result of both my work and scholarships and my parents' help. And I had people coming out of college with me that had over $100,000 in debt. And in other institutions, it's not uncommon, especially with multiple degrees, to see hundreds of thousands of dollars. I mean, that's a debt that they won't get out of until they're nearly at retirement age. And that's
right.
That's one of those areas where we've seen Keynesian economics come into play with making that money easy for folks, and we've seen the perversity of telling kids that the only way to success is college. There's a whole lot of problems there. Those are all unintended consequences, saddling kids with debt like that. But it's exciting to see places like Crown that are working to make sure that they're actually blessing these kids as well as educating them and making sure they don't start off 12 moves behind.
Exactly. Yeah. So my hat's off to those guys. They're great.
Absolutely. Well, Glenn, best of luck, and I look forward to talking to you again soon, sir.
Sounds good. Thank you so much. I had a great time.
Please subscribe and rate us on iTunes to help spread the word. We'll be back with you next week with more campaign insights from My Campaign Coach.